Hi, and welcome to Habitual Excellence. I'm Mark Graban, and we're joined today by Dr. David Mayer. He has a couple different roles. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Patient Safety Movement Foundation. He's also Executive Director of the MedStar Institute for Quality and Safety. So, Dave, thank you so much for being a guest here today.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's great to be on the podcast and look forward to having a good conversation about patient as well as caregiver safety.
Yeah. So very important issues, of course. And before we delve into that, I gave a brief introduction to you, but I was wondering if you could fill in some of the details, tell the audience a little bit more about your background and some highlights from your career.
Glad to, Mark. Well, as you mentioned, I currently have positions where I volunteer my time as the CEO for the Patient Safety Movement Foundation. That's a global organization in 48 countries and over 4,800 hospitals around the world. And we're committed to zero preventable harm. And we produce what are called actionable patient safety solutions, which are evidence-based toolkits that hospitals use to reduce, preventable harm events like bed sores, hospital-acquired infections, things like that. I also have spent my last almost 10 years with MedStar Health. It's a large health system in the Maryland and DC area, 10 hospitals, 280 non-acute facilities. And I originally was the vice president of quality and safety, and I've sort of, rolled into more of a half-time, part-time role now, and I serve as the executive director of the MedStar Institute for Quality and Safety, which is focused on research, education, and innovation in the safety and quality space. I guess my history goes back in safety, even before the Institute of Medicine report. When I was a resident in 1985, I was involved in a wrong-sided surgery with our team. And not only did we make that mistake, which caused our patient to have 2 surgical incisions versus 1,
right.
We then, including me, lied to the patient in recovery room for fear of medical malpractice, for fear of losing our license. And I was confident, but the attending surgeon told the patient that under anesthesia, he had discovered the patient had 2 hernias and was able to fix both hernias under 1 surgical procedure, saving him a second day from missing work. And when I was sent to the recovery room to discharge him, feeling I was going to feel the wrath of that medical error, he was all smiles and said to me, "No, today's my lucky day," and told me the story of that he had 2 hernias. And instead of fessing up, I looked at him and said, "Yes, today's your lucky day," and I signed him out. So, and I still live with that case. So I was exposed to medical error in 1985. I then got very interested in the topic and in, being a cardiac anesthesiologist, I probably put in more central lines than anybody within our hospital because every open heart surgery case got a central line. And I'd always ask our administration in the 90s, how come we don't track my complication rates, my infection rates? I don't know what happens to my patients 3-4 days down after surgery. Why don't we do that? And I was always assured, "Oh, I'm sure you're good. I'm sure you're fine." And then the Institute of Medicine report came out and it highlighted a lot of these issues. And then, as I like to joke, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. All of a sudden, my CEO and our leadership said, "Who's that guy in anesthesia that's been talking about this?" And, in 2000, 2002, I pretty much became, one of team members that started quality and safety and led to the University of Illinois Institute for Patient Safety Excellence. So it was kind of an interesting play. I will say I also spent 4 years at Abbott Labs as a medical director in the hospital products division. In those 4 years, I learned more about quality and safety and cycle compression and Six Sigma than I ever did within the hospital. And so when I come back to the clinical world in 2002, that was very advantageous for me to have that background and be able to train people on these different tools that other industries have been using.
Yeah. Well, as you told that story, as you said, going back to 1985, the way you first framed that, you said, you lied to the patient, but then you uncovered, I think, the deeper layer to that. It might be more accurate to say you felt pressured into not speaking honestly. I guess with an attending involved, there's a little bit of, it sounds like there's issues related to hierarchy and culture that sometimes perpetuates some of this. That's difficult to change, I bet.
It is, especially, back in the 80s when that story happened. Look, it took me 19 years before I started sharing that story with people in healthcare. And the first group I really shared it with were medical students. When I used to give patient safety talks, I was the academic dean for the University of Illinois College of Medicine and had redone the curriculum so that the students back in the 2003, 2004 was one of the first medical schools to have a 4-year curriculum around quality and safety. And I shared that story with them. So it took 19 years, but I joked with the residents and students when they hear it that if I had raised my hand and said, you know what? No, that's not what happened. You only had one hernia and we're not telling you the truth. I probably wouldn't have finished my residency. That was a pretty powerful. Right. And again, the culture was deny and defend, which is still out there today, unfortunately, that we'd rather hide our mistakes than talk about them in an open and honest culture that allows us to, one, learn from them, and two, potentially, resolve the issues with family members who our gentleman didn't know, and probably to this day didn't know that he had a medical error, but most patients know something wasn't right. Something definitely happened that shouldn't have happened, and we don't tell them the truth.
Yeah, and I think this idea of learning from mistakes, is powerful. And when an organization can't hear about the mistake or can't be honest about the mistake, that hampers learning. That harms are, it slows down any sort of effort to move towards zero harm, I guess, when that's still prevalent or still existing.
I totally agree. And I was very blessed in my career that when I was at the University of Illinois to work with a great team of people at our Institute for Patient Safety Excellence, Tim McDonald, Nikki Senamani, Kelly Smith, Bruce Lampert, and we worked with our hospital leadership to create what was called the 7 Pillars program, which was truthful and open and honest communication after medical errors had occurred, and when appropriate, with apology to the patient and family member. And that program really got a lot of national recognition because not only was it the right thing to do, we proved it was the smart thing to do, that patients didn't go running to lawyers. You were able to, bring in legal representatives of both sides and resolve issues in 3 to 4 to 5 months in a very honorable way with apology. Mm-hmm. Instead of going to court and fighting battles in Cook County, it could go 5-6 years of depositions and retelling the story. And so that program got a lot of national recognition, and I was very honored to be part of that team that had helped show that, yes, being open and honest is the way you should be. And it reminded me of my history of that case.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing that story, with me and with our audience here. And when you talk about being able to speak honestly, I know one important initiative of yours. I was wondering if you could talk about it. Is a program called Candor. Mm-hmm. And so, what was that, or what is that now, even?
Yeah, Candor is an amazing program. Candor stands for Communication and Optimal Resolution. So, based on a lot of the work we were doing back in 2005, 2006, around that 7 pillars, open and honest communication with patients and families model, Rick Boothman, who had really been a pioneer in this work at the University of Michigan, was doing similar work. In fact, we learned a lot from Rick as we were rolling out our programs. And there were 1 or 2 others across the country that were trying this new approach. And I always like to say my career has been defined as better lucky than good. Because at the time we had a young U.S. Senator named Obama, who was very interested in the work they were doing. He really believed, and he had put a bill forward called the Medic Act of 2005, which was medical error, disclosure, and compensation. And he really believed that the solution to the medical malpractice crisis and the solution to the patient safety crisis was transparency, honesty, and open communication. And so his healthcare staff would always want updates from us on the 7 Pillars program. And we would quarterly go to DC, or his lead policy analyst would be in Chicago and meet with us. And then all of a sudden he decides to run for president. He gets elected. And shortly afterwards, we wrote a position paper for his staffers. And 6 months later, he announced he was putting $25 million into research on these types of programs, which eventually, through AHRQ and a task order, and then MedStar's involvement, as well as 2 other health systems, we designed and implemented and rolled out the Candor Toolkit, which is now on the AHRQ website, free of cost, and people could download it. And there's, I think, close to 700 hospitals across the country that have now started implementing Candor at different stages. Some are well along the way and fully implemented. Others are about 50%, but they're moving forth and they're seeing the same results that we saw at Illinois and Rick Boothman saw at Michigan. It's being open and honest is truly the right thing to do for many reasons.
And you mentioned 700 hospitals. There's still opportunity for growth. So hopefully other people listening will check out that program if it's not part of their hospital or health system.
Yes, there is.
So, one other thing I wanted to ask you related to the patient safety movement. You've already brought up the idea of zero harm. And I know the Patient Safety Movement Foundation in particular is a very strong advocate for working toward zero preventable harm. So I was wondering if you could talk about that as a goal. I've heard pushback. I bet you get pushback of saying, well, zero is not possible. Why do we talk that way? How do you engage in conversation with somebody who questions zero as a goal?
Yeah, and look, I understand all the human factor issues and relationships, but imagine if the aviation industry said, you know what, our goal is 2 plane crashes per year. That's going to be a great improvement because we used to have 6 or 7, but we want to get to 2. If you're on one of those 2 planes, it's not right. And we say the same thing in healthcare. If not 0, then what? 1, 2, 3? No, we should strive for 0. We understand that that's a lofty, challenging goal, but we don't see any other number that makes us happy, that creates the urgency we need. And so we have set that goal of 0 preventable harm. And in fact, one of the things we've been moving forth, and we're very optimistic with the new administration coming in, is to have a patient safety moonshot. And the analogy goes back to the days of, think of when President Kennedy stood before the American public and said, we are going to put a man on the moon by the end of this decade. And everybody said, what? We haven't even gotten somebody around the globe once, and we're going to do this?
Right.
Yet, when challenged, this country rose up. The best scientists, the best knowledge was put to that task, and they succeeded. When you think of things we've done in healthcare, central line infections and ventilator-associated pneumonias have pretty much gone to 0 in most hospitals. The polio vaccine, now the vaccine for COVID. And then when President-elect Biden was vice president, President Obama asked him to lead the cancer moonshot, right. Cancer in 10 years. And he had started that work, and they were doing some great stuff over the first year before the funding was pulled on that program. So we believe the concept of a patient safety moonshot, where we will get to 0 preventable harm by the end of this decade, is something that may resonate with the new administration because they have believed in it when it came to cancer. So why not believe in it when it comes to preventable medical harm? And that's both for patients and for healthcare workers. The pandemic has exposed so many of those gaps, and we need to protect those at the front line so they could do the best job they can in protecting their patients from preventable errors.
Yeah, and you mentioned Vice President Biden. I remember I've attended two of the national annual events from the Patient Safety Movement Foundation, and I remember at one of them, he was still Vice President Biden, came and gave a talk, and I really came away impressed with his interest, if not passion, in health, about healthcare and reducing harm, and he seemed quite knowledgeable about that. So it was really good to see.
Yeah, he's been a big supporter of our Patient Safety Movement Foundation. He mentioned he's been a keynote speaker for a couple years. A little history there is our founder, Joe Kiani, was able to get a 30-minute appointment with him when he was vice president a number of years ago to talk about the patient safety crisis. As President-elect Biden often does, that 30 minutes turned into almost 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
So blown away by the information, the statistics, and the types of errors that healthcare systems see, that he wanted to learn more. And that's when he agreed to say, I want to come and I want to share my own experiences. Look, he's seen it from the political federal side of understanding healthcare. He's also seen it from the personal side with the tragedies he's gone through. First, a car accident that took his first wife, and then his son, Beau. In fact, at the Patient Safety Foundation, we have a Humanitarian award we give out to those who truly help make care safer. One of the Humanitarian awards is the Beau Biden Humanitarian Award, named after the president-elect's son. Mm-hmm. Gets it. And I love during one of those speeches that you were talking, the presentations, he refers to nurses as God's angels and the work that they do. You could tell, you could feel that he's not only been a leader in it, but he's been a user of the system and seen the great things it does, but sometimes the not so good things that it does.
Yeah. And, I would hope, safety, patient safety should be the furthest thing from a partisan issue that we have. This was probably 8 years ago. My congressional representative in Texas at the time was a Republican. He's a physician. I was able to schedule 15 minutes with him in his Texas office when he was in town. And that 15 minutes turned into more like 45 minutes. And, that conversation, I don't know, what it led to, but I had a chance to sort of try to have, try to share some thoughts, with him. And, when we think of, Paul O'Neill, mm-hmm. Of course, who served in a number of Republican administrations, including George W. Bush. Safety is clearly one of the defining issues of his life. And so, to that point, I wanted to hear a little bit of your recollections. You invited Mr. O'Neill to come speak at MedStar, and what some of your memories were of that.
Well, yeah, I love Paul. I used to enjoy, connecting with him when the National Patient Safety Foundation was around, and him being a board member, and then at IHI meetings. And so when I first came to MedStar, I was recruited naturally to improve the quality and safety of the care that was provided for patients. But all of us knew that there was another big issue, and that was healthcare safety. And Paul built his tremendous company in Alcoa all about protecting the frontline worker is your top priority. And then everything else, the profits, the efficiencies will come from that. And he proved that model over and over again. And so we really rallied around patient safety at MedStar, but I wanted to get our leadership to truly appreciate things about injuries to workers at the front line, needle sticks, lifting injuries, now workplace violence injuries. So I reached out to Paul and said, Paul, I need you to come in to talk to 300 of our leaders, our CEOs, our hospital presidents, the top people, and I don't want you to hold back. I want you to talk about the importance of things like OSHA rates and DART rates and things that you have learned through your experiences, and get our organization to understand that if we don't have workforce safety, we never get patient safety. And it goes back to the Lucian Leap Institute and the white paper, Joy and Meaning at the Workplace. I mean, Paul really anchored that white paper so well. So he came in and I sat at lunch with him and I said, bring it on, don't hold back. And I'm telling you, that was one of the best received presentations we have ever had at our senior management leadership level. Everybody in the audience was riveted. The next day, our CEO said, I want OSHA rates, DART rates, needle stick rates. I want all these indicators to be included on our quality and safety scorecards that we present to the board, that we present to leadership at the hospitals, and that we present to all our associates across the system. And we did. And we, just like we've seen tremendous improvements in quality and safety for our patients at MedStar, we've also seen tremendous improvements in the safety environment that our workers are working in. And again, with the pandemic, it's only made it that much more important in protecting those who serve on the front lines, who have just been heroes, as we've all seen what they've done.
Right. And he always had such a great way of delivering, an important message. And, perhaps maybe partly because of his position, he could speak truth to power. Some would argue he was power. He didn't carry himself that way, but I think he, the who he was and the message and what he had accomplished was certainly, he was uniquely positioned to say some of those things to people who needed to hear it, maybe.
He was, and very well respected. And like you say, this is not a partisan issue. I mean, we have shown that when we get together and treat it bipartisanly, we are able to make a difference. I'll tell you, still in the state of Maryland, as far as I know, the only legislation that was unanimously approved was a sepsis bill that we had brought forward, raising sepsis awareness across the state to educate the public. Unanimous approval. Both sides of the aisle said, we get this. This is important. We're there with you. Let us know what you need from us. So yes, this is a bipartisan issue. And if we can't rally around the safety of those at the front line, as well as those they take care of, I don't know what else we could be able to rally around.
Yeah, and it's going to take a lot of rallying, it seems. One other thought that comes to mind, with Paul O'Neill, he talked about the power of theoretical limits. So this idea of zero harm, it's the only correct goal, and it takes huge effort to get there. And seem like part of the way we get there is not punishing when harm occurs, or not getting to zero by covering up the harm. There's health systems out there who talk about this dynamic of when they have more candor, when they have more open and honest reporting, the number of reported incidents goes up until it starts going down. You've probably, what are your thoughts on that dynamic and how we work through that?
Oh, no doubt. And it was something that I literally, for the first 6 months after we launched our high reliability, tools and techniques and behaviors across the system, and the importance of a just culture, a fair and just culture, all these other elements in a reporting system. For the first 6 months, I was always at least once a week in our CEO's office, reminding him that don't worry that you're seeing the number of reported events going up. I predicted it would. Everybody predicts it does. It's a sign of a culture being willing to open and honestly share an event that happened without fear of retribution. And so, yes, we did see those numbers go up, but that's what you want to see. That's a learning environment. That's a learning culture. And then you're able to learn from those things. And now we've got technology with automated global trigger tools where we could literally get these reports of potential ongoing harm as it's occurring right out of our electronic health record versus waiting 3-4 days for it to be recognized and reported. So this culture is really changing. And I loved in reading, I've read so much of Paul O'Neill's books and work. I used to love his quote that the only time you would see him in your face is if he heard about an event at one of the plants and you were the manager and you weren't the one that reported it. If he heard a day later then he would be in your face. But as long as you raised your hand, picked up the phone, and told him what was going on or what just happened and what you're going to do, he embraced it. So yes, that is part of the culture. And he told that story at that presentation. So it was very, very cool to see.
Yeah. One last question for you. You talk about the moonshot, and there's the vision, which is important, and then there's the huge effort. I did a quick Google search here. When President Kennedy had announced this ambition of going to the moon, there ended up being 400,000 people involved in getting to the moon, and that's probably both. I don't know if that's direct, indirect, but a huge effort. And it seems like the parallel to Moonshot regarding healthcare safety is similar. So I'm not asking you for numbers of people, but what are your thoughts on how do we marshal that huge effort toward that vision?
I think it's going to take the new administration to really put this out there as a priority. I mean, President Kennedy said this is a priority. It wasn't the only priority. They had other things that they were focused in on, but this was one of their agenda items to do. So I think more so than maybe the number of people, it's the number of stakeholders that need to be involved. We need industry involved in technology. We need pharmaceutical companies. We need IT companies. We need patients and family members at the table. We need insurance companies. And, so it's the number of stakeholders that all have to be there agreeing that this is how we get there. It's going to be tough, but we think, at least to start, some good examples are, one, the creation of a National Patient Safety Authority, similar to the National Transportation Safety Board, that reviews all these events, learns from them, and disseminates the learning. We need an authority like that out there that could oversee safety across the country. And one of the models I like in this is where you have that national office, and then you have 12 or 13 regional type authorities that are on the, closer to the activities, can go to a hospital if needed, and then they share it up into the national authority. The second, we need aligned incentives. This idea is that we still pay for quantity and volume versus quality and safety. And the more you do, the better financially you are, regardless of how your outcomes are. And so pay for performance has moved us a little bit, but we need to have many more reimbursement models based on the quality and safety of the outcomes of the work you do versus the number of procedures you do. Mm-hmm. Finally, these models like candor and transparency. We need transparency in outcomes so patients and families can make informed decisions on where they want their care. And we need to be open and honest after preventable harm occurs so we could all learn from it. In the airline industry, they never compete on safety. They'll compete on lost luggage, arrival times, but never in safety. And we need to have that culture across our whole healthcare systems around the country that say, if we have something, we learn from it together and we improve together. Mm-hmm. We're not doing that to the level we should be. So those are just some ideas that I think many people, who we've been talking to, believe is a great first start.
Yeah. And that was an idea that Paul O'Neill talked about in relation to the Pittsburgh Regional Health Initiative, that the hospitals and health systems in the area should not be competing on safety, exactly as you had stated that, Dave.
Yeah. And a number of organizations, I love the work that the Jewish Healthcare Foundation is doing around this and really raising awareness. They had a real nice piece in Health Affairs around the concept of a National Patient Safety Authority. And so Karen Feinstein and her organization, kudos to them, and Leah Binder at Leapfrog have been really pushing this along with the Patient Safety Movement Foundation. And so I think it's starting to gain some momentum.
Well, great. So we'll look forward to more momentum and great things happening in 2021 and beyond. So thank you.
No, thank you, Mark. It's been great, and appreciate you giving me the time today.
Oh, of course. Thank you. Again, our guest has been Dr. David Mayer from the Patient Safety Movement Foundation. Their website is patientsafetymovement.org. And he's also from the MedStar Institute for Quality and Safety. I'll put links to all of that in the show notes so listeners and viewers can go and check that out and learn more. So again, thank you. Thank you so much, Dave.
Thank you, Mark. Stay safe.
You too. Thanks.